Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dawn Rasmussen with Generations Health, and on behalf of Loudoun County Area Agency on Aging, I would like to welcome you to our caregiving education program, Taboo Topics, How to Talk to Your Parents About the Future More Comfortably, presented by Jennifer Fitzpatrick. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few things with you. Everyone is muted during the program to eliminate any background noise. However, the program is interactive, so we do encourage you to ask questions, to answer questions, or if you have any comments on the discussion that is taking place, please feel free to do so. To do this, you can utilize the chat feature. To find the chat, you can scroll over the bottom of your screen, and there you will see a banner that pops up. On the banner, there is a bubble that says chat. When you click on that, the chat feature will launch and will most likely show up on the right-hand side of your screen. When you use chat, your questions, comments, answers will only be seen by our sponsors and Jennifer and myself. This is simply for privacy reasons. Again, we encourage your participation, so please use the chat feature. Jennifer is great about keeping an eye on the chat to answer your questions. And we have Leslie Katz and Aaron Nesbitt here to also answer your questions. As I mentioned, we are so grateful to have Loudoun County Area Agency on Aging sponsoring today's program. If you have any questions about services and programs offered, please feel free to send an email to ataasupp@loudoun.gov. The staff are there as you navigate your caregiving journey, and you will notice the email is included in the chat for you in just a moment. Are you concerned about an older parent or loved one? Would you like ideas on how to better talk to them about the future? If so, this event was created for you. Our presenter today is the author of Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One, and a longtime gerontology instructor at Johns Hopkins University's Certificate on Aging program. She is one of less than 800 certified speaking professionals worldwide and has been featured in national media such as the Wall Street Journal, Reader's Digest, SiriusXM, CBS, ABC, and many more. When she's not working, she spends her time as a below-average first mate on her boat. Please join me in welcoming from Kent Island, Maryland, Jennifer L. Fitzpatrick, MSW, LCSWC, CSP.
Hey everybody, welcome. So glad to be with you today to talk about taboo topics, talking to our parents more comfortably about the future. Now, I know that some of you might be on and it's not a parent that you're helping out or that you want to have the conversation with. It might be a grandparent, it might be an aunt, an uncle, maybe someone else that's in your family. So obviously we're gearing the topic toward parents, but of course, all of this can apply to talking to anybody that you care about, an older loved one, about the future. So before we jump into our topic, I want to try to get a little bit of information about you and where you are in the journey with your parents. So Dawn is going to pull up a poll. And so don't write in the chat section right now. What we'd love to ask you to do is just to click on the first, second, or third. Where are you in the journey with your parent? And again, it could be your grandparent, your aunt, your uncle, whoever that person is that you're helping out. So is your loved one totally independent and you just want ideas to talk to him or her about the future? Or is your loved one needs some help from you and others right now, but can do much for themselves? Or last, is it that your loved one is mostly or completely dependent on you or others? So give us a little bit of feedback about which category that you fall in so we can try to just be aware of where everyone is. And again, during the course of the program, please write in your comments and your questions. We really want you to get what you need out of today's session. So please don't hesitate to write in any comments or questions. So give Dawn a moment to tally that up. Okay, all right, you all are all over the place. We've got about half of you, your loved one is completely independent and you're just looking for ideas on how to have a conversation about the future. About a third of you are saying that your loved one needs some help but can do a lot for themselves. And about 20% of you are saying that your loved one is completely dependent. So obviously we have a lot of different types of situations that we're dealing with right now. And I think we'll be able to get to lots of information that can help all of us in whatever situation you're in. So taboo, there's a lot, pardon me, of topics that we consider to be taboo, especially as they relate to older persons. And so people, for example, older than baby boomer age, so the traditionalists, people that are in their 80s, 90s, older than that, they often tend to think of money as maybe one of those taboo topics, whereas somebody who is millennial or a Gen Z person, generational person, might think that it's very common and very normal to talk about money. So a lot of what the taboos are can be based on generation. So sometimes the conversations that you might be thinking that you need to have are very much needed, and other times it might not be the case. So when I say it might not be the case, I want to give you the example of sometimes I've worked with families who have said, you know, my husband or my mom, let's say mom has a mid-stage of Alzheimer's, and I really want to have a conversation with her about where she wants to move. And whenever I have that conversation with her, because we can't take care of her anymore, she gets really, really upset. And so sometimes keep in mind that sometimes if your loved one, especially if they have advanced dementia, you might be stressing out about how do I talk to her? But it might be that you don't. You may have missed that window where you really can have a rational, reasonable conversation, that you might have to just go by what you know from when she was able to express herself or her needs or what she was looking for. So please keep in mind that if your loved one has got capacity, if they're competent, they don't have any cognitive impairment, yeah, you are probably gonna very much have those conversations. But I see a lot of people get themselves all psyched up and worried and stressed about talking to a loved one who has dementia, and the conversation really won't go anywhere, especially past the early stages. I write a whole chapter in the book, Cruising Through Caregiving, about the concept that your older loved one is still an adult. So even if they do have dementia, they're still a grown up. We want to always treat them with dignity. And we always want to try to put ourselves in that person's shoes. Your loved one is still an adult. And so one of the tough facts about having these taboo topic conversations is that you can talk all you want. If your loved one has capacity and he or she is competent, they can do whatever they want. And so sadly, sometimes we might have a conversation about money or driving or health issues, and we still have to wait for a crisis to unfold before anything actually changes. Now, this does not mean you don't try, because many of you will be successful, but sometimes you're going to have conversations with your older loved one and they are going to just say no. So we're going to talk about the strategies like being patient, being persistent, and other strategies that can really help you to have successful conversations where they do go somewhere. So just some of the topics we talked about: money, driving, housing options and/or moving, cognition, mental health, sex and dating can sometimes be one of those taboo topics, end of life wishes, death and dying, needing a higher level of care. Maybe, for example, your loved one is in a continuing care retirement community or a life care community, and your loved one is in the independent section, but it really is becoming more and more obvious that they probably benefit to move to that assisted living section. And having that conversation is really, really hard, because if you have a loved one in one of those communities, you know that there is a stigma oftentimes to moving to that higher level of care. So one of the reasons that these conversations can be so tough is it feels unnatural to tell somebody that's above us what to do. And I remember having to have some of these conversations with my dad and my grandmother, and it feels unnatural because it feels like they are the elder. They really are truly the elder, and we don't want to be in the position of asking them to do things or educating them. And sometimes they don't take us seriously. Sometimes it's simply because we are uncomfortable with the topic. And so a lot of times over the years, I've spent time with families and I say, oh, you really need to, that you and your loved one have to have a conversation. She really needs to update her advanced directives. The adult child is so uncomfortable with that because they haven't done their advanced directives. And maybe not only that, but they have minor children and they don't have a will. They don't have a plan for if they were to prematurely die while their child is young. And so a lot of it can stem from so we want to assess ourselves. Are we uncomfortable with the topics? And that's what's making it even tougher. Sometimes when we bring that negative energy or that uncomfortable energy to the conversation, it just makes it harder. Sometimes it's simple that the older person, your parent, doesn't want to talk about it with you. They just shut you down. They really don't want to talk about it. So some other things that can make it difficult is, are you finding the right time? Sometimes, and so often, these conversations are taking place in a hospital, or they're taking place after a fall, or they're taking place when there is a major crisis happening. And that's what today is all about. We want to try to help you to reduce that. We want to have the right time, which is a time that is not about anything else except having these conversations, not having a crisis. Finding the right place. So when I would have a conversation with my grandmother about something that I thought was important for her, maybe for her to update her advanced directives, I didn't do it at her kitchen table where I had been having her cook me breakfast for years. That oftentimes puts me in that situation of being the child. And sometimes it's not the best place. Maybe being out to lunch, maybe driving in the car. For any of you who have teenagers or kids, you might find that when you're in the car, when they're a captive audience and you're driving them to school or practice, hopefully many of you have kids that are in school or going to practices, or you're driving them to a friend's home or the park or something like that. And you find there's an opportunity to just bring up something, maybe something about school, maybe something about bullying, maybe something about their mental health. It's a little bit less formal. So sometimes that might be the right place to have a conversation. But in a situation where when I would be at my grandmother's table feeling like more of a kid, maybe not. And then finding right energy. Let's face it, if you're on the live program, it's March in 2021. We have been through a year of the pandemic and COVID-19 policies, and everyone's pretty darn exhausted for whatever reason. Maybe you're an essential worker. Maybe you are trying to fight over internet in your home with your spouse and kids because the kids are homeschooling, your spouse is homeschooling. But you're probably exhausted for some reason. And what you want to do as far as when you want to have these conversations is find some good energy for yourself. Make sure that you're not doing it after, or try not to do it after a long day of fighting with the family about who gets to use the internet for work or school, or maybe after you've taken some time to meditate, or maybe after you've taken some time to sort of center yourself. But when we come in with negative energy, it can go terribly wrong. So another reason, sometimes you want to have a conversation with an older loved one or a parent, and you have had a difficult relationship in the past. Many of us have had estrangements with parents or loved ones that we are helping to help care for, or that person has always always thought that we were overly critical. So that can sometimes be that maybe you are not the exact right person for doing the conversation. Maybe it should be someone else, another sibling, another family member, somebody from the faith community that your loved one participates in. Maybe the doctor needs to be a bigger part of the conversation. So again, remember that these conversations can be very, very difficult if your loved one has advanced cognitive impairment. There does reach a stage oftentimes where you are thinking, okay, I really want my mom's input on who we hire for home care, or it might not be that you have a conversation with mom about it. It might be that you see how she reacts to the candidates that you bring in from the home care agency, see how her body language and her facial expressions are. So take some of that pressure off. If your loved one is in the early stages, it might be that you want to have those conversations, but in the mid stages, often it's not going to be productive. So in preparing for a conversation, depending on what topic it is that you want to cover with your loved one, be familiar with some facts and resources. So try to educate yourself. So for example, one of the biggest areas where we see a lot of people not understand is Medicaid planning or estate planning. And so a lot of times when people are planning their estate, they just simply do not understand what Medicaid rules are. There are a lot of people that eventually need medical assistance and no, they don't have to go completely broke first. Or for example, let's say you have two parents and one has advanced dementia and the other one doesn't, and you're starting to look at what are we going to need to do for dad who has advanced dementia. Encouraging them and understanding a little bit more about Medicaid planning and how elder law attorneys can help if you do have assets, how to protect the wife, the mom, the spouse that might be able to stay in her home, remain with a certain amount of income, keep her car, that you don't have to spend and sell everything for dad to potentially utilize at this point. So when you understand, and if Dawn wouldn't mind just putting these two websites in the chat section, these are two websites that can really help you find an elder law attorney and understand more about how an elder law attorney can help you. And really, this is for anybody who thinks that their loved one might need a nursing home at some point, and especially if they think that there is a spouse that they don't want to break down all of their assets. So, for example, if you want to talk to your loved one about driving, there's a lot of data that can really help you to feel more confident in that conversation. And so one of the best websites and is the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. And this is information simply about just being older and driving. This does not even mean, let's say your eyesight is still great. Even if you are 80 and you're in pretty great health, your vision is not exactly what it used to be. Your reflex and reaction times are not exactly what they used to be. So if you are trying to have a conversation with mom or dad about, hey, we want to look at and explore, should you be driving? Having some facts, having some information about what is safe and what is not, and what the statistics are for older drivers. And listen, we're not saying that every older person shouldn't drive. I believe that everybody should drive if they're still capable. But just having some information and some backup to guide those conversations can be really, really helpful. And these are some other terrific resources. So one strategy that I think can be really helpful is if you're worried about mom's driving, let's say, for example, you have seen mom, her car seems to have a new dent every time that she drives over to your house, or you know that she's been in 4 fender benders in the last 3 months and you're so concerned about her. If you go to these websites, the AARP safer driversafety.org or seniordriving.aaa.org, and those two initially, the AARP has safe driving courses, smart driver courses. And Darn, I would like to ask you to put these in the chat section when you get a moment. What we want is to encourage that person maybe to go and take a class or do an online assessment to sort of, so they can see objectively where are they. So AARP does the classes virtually. Hopefully they'll be doing them in person again soon. I don't think they are. But AAA has some really great personal assessments that the older person can do themselves. And if they're not internet savvy, you can print off for them. And this, I think a great strategy here is, especially if, like, say you're 50 and your mom is 20 or 25 years older, 75, perhaps you say, Mom, you know what? Let's both of us take the smart driver course and we get a discount on our insurance. That can be a really terrific way to introduce that topic but also act like it's not just about her age. And really, to me, even though older drivers are much more at risk, I don't think it really ever should be just about age. It should be about capability if you're concerned about your loved one's capability. Now, the last resource, the one that is nhtsa.gov that Dawn put in the chat section, this is a terrific resource for you to be aware of what the rules are in your state. And I know most of the people that we have on today are from Virginia, but we do have folks from other states. But you can look up what the rules are. And so when does somebody need to turn in their driver's license, or how often does that person really need to be retested, and why, if they have certain conditions? And just so you can be aware when you're having that conversation with your loved one, you always have the option. I know that this isn't a first choice for most of us, but you always have the option of inviting a call, making that phone call to your MVA, your DMV, whatever your state calls the motor vehicles, and saying, look, I'm concerned about my loved one and here's why. And doctors in many states do have the right to make a report if they're concerned about somebody's driving as well. So it's very, very nice to be able to be armed with some of that information when you're having the conversation. Conversations that are tough are going to go better if you have educated yourself, if you've taken the time to educate yourself. So as far as what the higher levels of care are, I can't tell you how many times families have said to me, well, my mom needs home health. No, she really doesn't. She needs home care. You want to try to understand a little bit. And by the way, the Loudoun County Area Agency on Aging is a wealth of information on helping you understand the different levels of care, so you understand what does your loved one mean. Remember, if you ever talk to mom and she's completely at home and she lives in a single family home in McLean and she's got her garden and she's super happy, and you start talking to her about, say, a CCRC, continuing care retirement community, or a life care community, she may be automatically going to nursing home. And she's thinking, well, you may have done your research and you know that, well, there's an independent section and there's an assisted section and then there's the nursing home section. And so it's very critical that you arm yourself. If you do want to have that conversation, know what the different options are. And again, the Loudoun County Area Agency on Aging, or if you don't reside in Loudoun County, or if your loved one doesn't reside in Loudoun County, you go to n4a.org and you put your zip code in and you can find your local area agency on aging. And Dawn, if you wouldn't mind putting n4a.org for those who don't reside, or they don't have a loved one who resides in Loudoun County. So for moving, if you are hoping to have a conversation about moving, you got to always remember that moving under the very best circumstances is difficult. Under the best circumstances. And so my husband and I bought the house this past in 2020, a house that we really love and we're really, really excited for. But I got to tell you, that was under really terrific circumstances. We were real happy to move. But even moving under great circumstances that we were super excited about the new home, it was stressful, as you probably all know if you've ever moved. You got to change your utilities, and are you still gonna have cable, or do you want to do what they so-called call cutting the cord and just do apps on Netflix and Amazon? The amenities that we could walk to from our old house are not available anymore. We have different amenities. We're getting used to different neighbors. We had to hire a moving company. We had to pack. So moving is incredibly stressful under the best of circumstances. Typically, when an older person is moving, it is not, for them, at least in their perception, the best of circumstances. It's scary. It's stressful. It's one of those situations where they oftentimes will say, well, gosh, is this the last place I'm going to live? I mean, theoretically, all of us might be, wherever we're living today, could that be the last place you live? Yes. But a lot of times it's looked at as a negative. It's looked at as a sad thing, as a bad thing that you're moving, and oh my gosh. And the stigma of, especially if you're moving to any kind of senior living, any kind of assisted living, But even just downsizing, maybe you're not trying to suggest that your loved one or talk to your loved one about going to assisted living or anything like that. It's, hey, mom, you've got 3 spiral staircases in your home. And we want you, wouldn't it be great if you lived in a rancher? No more stairs. One of my uncles always says, stairs are evil. He always, it's his big quote. He always says, stairs are evil. But if you're really, she's had some falls, maybe she had a knee replacement. You just, oh, she has to go down this really big staircase to get to the laundry room. We want to remember that moving under the very best circumstances is difficult, and a move that you probably aren't too excited about is even more and more stressful. So one of the things that occurs frequently when a family member, a daughter, son, grandson, niece, nephew, has a conversation with an older loved one is that oftentimes they feel like the older person thinks that they're maintaining themselves at home independently, but they're not. And I'm going to share with you the story about my grandma. So when my grandma started to decline, she was 80. She started declining for a couple of months. And then when she got to be 85, she really started to have some decline, and she was falling, and she was having more hospitalizations for a variety of different conditions. And she was calling us in the middle of the night, one of her daughters or one of us kids, the grandkids, or she was wanting someone to stay with her more often and come over more frequently. And my grandmother, she was one of those people that lived long and died short, which is I think the goal that most of us really want. She was very healthy she had her issues here and there, but for most part, she was really healthy. And then the last year of her life was kind of a challenge. And when it finally came to she was falling, she was going to the hospital a lot, she constantly wanted somebody over there. We were all in it, and she was luckier than most. There were probably, I want to say 10 of us, maybe more of us, that were taking turns sleeping there. And it finally got to a point where I was the appointed person in the family that had the conversation with her. I said, look, we really need you to consider assisted living because this is becoming quite a bit. It seems like somebody's here 24 hours a day. She did not like that. She was very, very annoyed, as a matter of fact, about that. And I had the conversation with her a few times. And then I said, well, would you consider some home care? She was not happy. We got her some home care. And home care, she did agree to it. And again, she was a grown-up. She was allowed to say yes or no to these things. But guess what? We, as the adult kids and grandkids, we were also allowed to say no too. It got to a point where my cousins and my aunts and my uncles, we all got to a point where it was disrupting health, marriages, jobs, sleep. I remember there was a day where my dad called me and my dad said, Jennifer, I can't sleep on her couch another night. I just can't do it. I'm not getting the sleep that I need. And he set that boundary. And I thought, good. People are starting to feel it. And so I went back to my grandmother again. I said, Grandma, my dad can't do this. He needs to be sleeping in his own place. People want to come over. People want to visit. Maybe once a week someone can sleep here, but it can't be every night. And she didn't like it, but I started to make some headway, and she was still resistant. And it finally came down to one evening where I was sleeping over. And again, remember, this was not a conversation that happened one day. It was several times I had this conversation. Several people in the family had this conversation, but I was the primary one. And one night I was over there, and she was saying, oh, she was kind of giving me a hard time and saying, I really am okay. I just like having all of you over. And I said to her, all right, if you really are okay, let's just pretend I'm visiting. Let's you get yourself to the bathroom without my assistance. Let's you remember to take your meds without my assistance. Let's you make yourself a sandwich without my assistance. And very quickly in the next hour, she had a very defeated look on her face, and she got it. Because I said, I'm not gonna help you right now. I want you to show me if you're saying you don't need to move. because it was getting to the point where even with home care supplementing our efforts, we couldn't do it. It was just too much. And there were a lot of us. And so the reason that I share this is because my grandmother was one of those people that thought, oh, I'm independent. But I'm wondering if any of you can relate to that your loved one says, oh, everything's fine. I'm fine. But they expect you to be cooking, or they expect you to be driving them to the doctor, or they expect you to be sleeping over. And sometimes pulling back some of that support, like I did, and a lot of you out there might think I'm horrible and I'm mean that I did that. And it was tough. I mean, it was really hard to watch her struggle, but I think she really just finally got it then. And she agreed that, yeah, after another conversation or two, she agreed that she did need more help. And it was really tough, but it was really necessary, because the family caregivers, and there were a lot of us, that we were getting burnout. So sometimes withdrawing some of the support, Don is saying, my mom was like that, had to use some tough love. And people hate that. Listen, remember, if you've got a loved one with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia, don't do that. You just need to take action. You can't just say, oh, my mom has advanced dementia, she's wandering in the middle of the night, I'm going to pull back some of my support. No, you need to just start taking action. Don't do that strategy with someone with advanced dementia. You're going to get, you should be actually investigated by Adult Protective Services if you do that for neglect. Okay, so expect the person to be in denial. None of us have ever not been in denial. I promise you. We all have had denial about something in our lives. It's your brain's way of saying, I'm not ready to deal with this. So that was a big part of my grandmom's issue, is that she just was in denial. She didn't believe that she was struggling as much as she was. Create an agenda. Now, I'm a big list maker. I'm not saying you have to make a list, but I want you to just think about, what's your goal for the conversation? Is your goal to plant the seed? Or is your goal that at the end of this conversation, we're going to make an appointment for a mental health assessment or a cognitive assessment, or we're going to make some appointments for visiting some senior living communities? What do you have in mind? What makes sense? And I would say, frankly, if you're not in a crisis, I think planting the seed is typically the best first goal. So a lot of times, now I will tell you that with my grandma, my one of my aunts was the primary caregiver. And I call that, in Cruising Through Caregiving, I call that person the captain of the caregiving ship. That person really is mostly the delegator. And I can tell you that with my aunt, she would not have been the right person to have those conversations, because they were too close. So sometimes the primary caregiver, or the person closest emotionally and sometimes physically closest, geographically closest, is sometimes the worst person, because in some cases that person becomes and I'm trying to, for a lack of a better word, somebody that we're not giving as much respect to as the care recipient. That, oh, that person just is complaining, I see them all the time, and I can't believe they're saying this to me. Sometimes it has to be somebody outside of the primary caregiver. So who would be a good communicator? Somebody a little removed. So do you have a brother in Florida who hardly does anything, but mom listens to him? Now, a lot of you are going to say, yeah, I have somebody like that, and it would make me crazy if he was the one that gets through to her. Don't let your ego get in the way, because sometimes someone a little removed who has that conversation, that can be a way that they can contribute. A lot of times the person that you don't see or hear from on a daily basis, or who does less, believe it or not, sadly gets taken more seriously in a lot of cases with a lot of families. Some families, if they're more patriarchal, and sometimes that's cultural, and sometimes it's just the way that family is, maybe it does need to be if there's a patriarchal type of family where it's the oldest son or something like that, even if that person's not super close. Sometimes it's an authority figure inside the family or close to the family. Maybe there's that person that everyone in the family listens to, but maybe they're not specifically involved in the care. Or maybe they're a lawyer and they have a certain amount of cachet with your older loved one, or they are a nurse and they have some healthcare experience and they'll be listened to a little bit more. Authority figure outside the family. So someone from the faith community, if the person is religious. A doctor is great, but I think the doctor, it can't be the only one, but because the doctors are so busy. But maybe it's a psychotherapist or a support group leader that is having some conversations with that person, or a peer from a support group, or it could be maybe an attorney, a state attorney that's trusted by the family. So it's not always the person who is physically and emotionally closest to the older loved one. So pick the right place. Don't pick the wrong place. Try not to have it after when your mom makes you lunch and it's the kitchen table you've had your meals at since you were 5. It's probably going to put you psychologically at a disadvantage. Be careful. A lot of families say, well, it's mom's big 80th birthday, or it's Thanksgiving, or it's the big family 4th of July party. Let's talk to her then. You know what? Probably you don't want to do that. It sometimes feels like a good idea. Maybe there's a lot of people that are together, especially now that we've got the vaccine and people are feeling more comfortable, and maybe you're going to gather and, okay, next time we all get together, we need to have these conversations. You want to be careful about ganging up on your loved one. I do think there are times where having more than one person be participating is helpful. But when it's 10 people, it might be too much. And you also don't want to ruin the big 75th birthday or the big Thanksgiving celebration or the big New Year's party or the big whatever party or event it is. Be careful. Maybe the next day. Maybe everyone stays in town a couple of extra days. Be careful about distractions. Make the space for the conversation. Also, don't assume that you know everything going on in your older loved one's mind. Now, you might think you do, but you don't always. And so sometimes when a loved one goes to have these conversations and they get themselves all psyched up and nervous and, oh gosh, how's it going to go? What's my mom going to say? And mom says, I've actually been thinking about that. Maybe I shouldn't drive anymore. So don't assume that you know everything that's going on in his or her mind, because you don't. You really, really don't. Unless you're in a crisis situation, which this whole seminar is all about trying to avoid the crisis. Be patient, be persistent. Know that this is not going to be easy for your loved one. This is not going to be easy most of the time. In some cases, your loved one's going to say, yep, that makes sense, great idea. And that does happen sometimes. But in a lot of cases, you are threatening their independence, whether you're meaning to or not. You're threatening their what they perceive to be their quality of life. Choose your battles. If mom's drinking too much coffee and she shouldn't be having caffeine, but mom is also not taking her medicine, think really hard about which one you want to attack first. Does it really make sense to go after both? When you're thinking about how your loved one's going to react, consider what's going on with them. If there's been recent losses, the pandemic, of course, how they've reacted to COVID policies, depending on how you and your family have managed all of this, what's been going on with them mental health wise, what's going on with them medically. So just know that all of that is going to impact how they receive the conversation. And just try to think about what their mindset is. Maybe if they've had friends pass away recently, or if they haven't seen their grandkids in a year, or what, maybe they go to Florida or Arizona every winter and they didn't do it this year. I mean, think about the losses that have occurred. And again, it doesn't mean you put off important conversations, but just try to put yourself in their shoes as much as possible and think how they might, what might impact their reaction to the conversation. look for natural openings. So one that's great is my friend's mom just moved to an assisted living community. And if I want to talk to my mom about it, I might say, oh, and my mom knows my friend and she knows a little bit about my friend's mom. And oh yeah, she moved and this is why, this is how she made the decision. Just sprinkle in those natural opportunities. Or maybe her friend just died and didn't leave a will, and family is scrambling, they don't know what to do. The state is in the hands of the state in which she resides, and that happens. So those are natural openings when you see something going on in your life or in her life, and you can talk about it and you can broach the topic in a way that can be a little bit less threatening. Feel free to write in with any comments, any questions at all. We'd be glad if you have a specific example, if you want to share your story or what's on your mind, what you're worried about talking about, feel free to jump in at any point in the chat section. Know the limits of your power. You want to try to be persuasive to, hey mom, I want you to think about your driving. I want you to think about your advance directives, whatever it is you want your loved one to think about. But you also want to remember that unless you are mom or dad's guardian, you do not get to make the decisions. Now, when someone has advanced dementia, it is complicated. Most of the time, if your loved one has advanced dementia, you are not going to go get guardianship. Sometimes you're going to have to, but most of the time, there's going to be doctors that are going to say, okay, dad's incapacitated. Now we need to appoint, if he has not already determined that in his paperwork, the next of kin is going to be the decision maker, and you don't have to go through guardianship. So if that happens, or you're your mom or dad's guardian, you have control. Other than that, you do not. And so you've got to always remember that you have to respect your loved one as a grown-up. They are an adult. They get to make bad decisions. So the other day, I was talking to a friend who said that her 95-year-old grandmother doesn't want to take the COVID-19 vaccine. And she says, what do you think about that? And I said, well, I think she's a grown-up. And this woman has no dementia. I've met her many times. She has no dementia. She lives independently. And I said, I think talk to her about it, encourage her to talk to her doctor, give her the information. But I think she's a grown-up. And I think while you might believe it, and even her doctor might say, no, we recommend you get it, she does get to make that decision. So I think we have to be humble and acknowledge that this is not a child that we are dealing with. This is a grown-up, and they get to choose their life path. That said, it does not mean that you have to run around and, like with the example of if your parent expects you to do all their cooking, do all their cleaning, drive them to all their appointments, when there are other options. It doesn't mean that they have power over you either. Model the behavior that you want the parent to emulate. So for me, one of the big ones that I have always like to refer to is that my husband and I have had our advance directives and our wills done for well over 10 years, maybe even 15 years at this point. And so in our 30s, and my dad, I remember talking to my dad about it and wanting him to do the same. And I gave him a copy of ours and I said, we'd really love to have a copy of yours. Can you do yours? I think we all need to do it. It's not age dependent. If you're over 18, you really should have those documents. And so he was encouraged to do it. Or maybe you're noticing your mom is struggling with anxiety. You want her to talk to her doctor about maybe getting a therapist or getting some intervention on or strategies on how to deal with it. Maybe you can share your experience with anxiety and having gone to the doctor and talked to your doctor about it. Also, we talked about looking at natural openings, but it's also really nice to look out for celebrity stories or pop culture stories that are in the news. And so when Valerie Harper, for example, was very sick, her husband was very, very adamant that she would never go to a hospice or receive hospice care. And to me, that was such a huge learning experience, because what I don't think Valerie Harper's husband understood was that was a supplement. That wasn't not taking care of Valerie. That was a service that in a lot of cases might prolong her life. Some persons that receive hospice live longer than terminally ill people who don't have hospice. It would be a service, it would be help. To me, that is a natural opening for a conversation about hospice. Robin Williams' death anniversary oftentimes is brought up in the media. If you're worried about mental health or suicidal ideation or just memory, that might be something to talk about if your concerns, if you're worried about your loved one's mental health. So there's always stories, there's always television shows like This Is Us, for example. If many of you might be watching it, it's an NBC show, and one of the characters has dementia, and that if your mom loves that show and you want to have an early conversation, your mom is fine, or maybe she has some early stage problems. Mom, if you were not able to tell us what you wanted verbally, what do you want? Let's talk about those important subjects now. But look out when you see the show Grace and Frankie. It's a great Netflix show, shows all kinds of issues around different areas of aging, moving, or health situations, mental health, cognitive health. So looking for pop culture moments, whether they're real, whether they're fiction, articles that you've read, can really help to give you another natural opening to these conversations that doesn't feel forced. Involve others who care about your loved one. You don't want it to just be you. And when in the book, Cruising Through Caregiving, and Dawn, if you put cruisingthroughcaregiving.com in the chat section, if you go to that website, you can download all the worksheets and the first chapter for free. And the website Cruising Through Caregiving, one of the exercises is called the MET exercise, and it helps you to find in your friend, family, neighbor network that care about you, that care about your loved one, that you're going to maybe involve in helping. And sometimes it might be that you're going to find somebody to be that communicator if you're not the right person, if you do that MET exercise. Explaining how it's impacting you and others. I did this when I had the conversation with my grandmom, and I said, look, my one aunt, she's having to call out of work and it's creating a problem for her job. For my dad, I said, my dad's not sleeping and he really doesn't do well when he doesn't sleep. And giving examples. I'm not saying you want to try to make the person feel guilty, but say, this is how it's impacting your great grandkids, or this is how it's impacting your husband when you won't accept some help in the home or housekeeping in the home or having people, Meals on Wheels come in. Your husband's really struggling making meals. So when you're explaining the impact that it's having on others, sometimes that can be effective as well. So who has the final say? Of course, again, the person, if they don't have advanced dementia, or if they are legally competent and they don't have advanced dementia, they really do get the final say. So you just want to practice patience and persistence. And what we want to strive for is to not be in a hospital room having these decisions made at the last minute. Good decisions are typically not made under duress. So this is another strategy to say, look, I don't want to have this be a last minute decision. I want to talk about these important topics ahead of time. And again, past mid-stage, you're probably going to wind up, somebody in your family is going to wind up as power of attorney. Sometimes, I know that this might sound tough, but some people wrote in about they've had to do this tough love strategy with their loved one. Sometimes withdrawing support, not when someone has advanced dementia, but if someone does it and they're saying, I can do it, I'm living independently, I'm fine, I don't need home care, I don't need all that. Sometimes just pulling back a little bit and letting them see that they are struggling can be part of an important part of the strategy. It's showing rather than telling. And sometimes they get the message quicker when we utilize that strategy. So I thank everybody so much for joining us today. Being on this program today is brave. You know that this is a topic that is tough And we know that you all have the best intentions for your loved ones, but try to talk to them early, often be patient and persistent. And we're going to turn it back over to Dawn, who's going to put a quick survey into the chat section, and it will take you less than 60 seconds to give us a little bit of feedback, if you would. In the meantime, if anybody has any last comments, questions, examples, we do still have some time. So we're glad to work through anything that anyone would like to talk about. And Dawn, again, if you would put in that survey for this program, it'll take everybody less than 60 seconds to just cut and paste and just give us any feedback you'd like us to know about today's program. So any comments, any questions whatsoever, we are going to keep the lines open. Okay, third slide from the last. Somebody's asking for the third slide from the last. Hang, let's see. Is it this one that you were looking for, Michelle? I'm hoping that that's it. Michelle, if it's something else, just let us know if this is the one after that. This one? Yeah, and the video is available. Can you please discuss a little bit more about your last comment about using tough love? Now, I don't generally call it tough love. Somebody else wrote in that they call it tough love. What I'm trying to say, and Michelle, if that's the one that you're looking for, if that is good. When I say 2 slides toward the end, okay, 1, 2, let's see what we got. How's this? Okay. So I'm going to talk, somebody's asking a little bit about the tough love issue. What I'm saying is you have every right to protect your space, your time, your energy. And so let's say you are over at your mom's 24 hours a day. You're doing everything for her, you and your siblings and your spouse and your kids. And you're trying to say, Mom, hey, can we please consider home care? Let's bring an aide in. Let's get an agency to help out. Do 10 hours a week. It'll take some off of us. I think what's important there is if she says no, then maybe say, listen, Mom, okay, I appreciate it. You're a grown up. You are allowed to say no. Donna's saying it's setting boundaries. That's a great thought, Donna. But I'm only going to be able to do this much. I'm only going to be able to bring meals 3 nights a week. I'm only going to be able to drive you to the doctor for really important appointments. The others, we're going to need you to set up some transportation. So I think what I'm trying to say is you have to, because listen, if you don't set those kinds of boundaries, you will burn out. So that's what I mean by this setting boundaries, tough love, the example that I gave about my grandmother. There are a couple other people. Okay, this is a question for Loudoun County. They're handling it. Regarding to driving, how to convince a parent that they're a danger to others as well as themselves. He's 88 and stubborn about giving up the car. So Maureen, the answer to that is you can't always, but you want to just, I think giving specific examples of why you're concerned. Dad, on these dates, I observed, you went through a red light when we were driving together, or there's been more dings on your car, or you've had 6 tickets in the last 6 weeks. I think for a lot of people, what is helpful, and many of you have probably said this, like, would you let your grandkids ride with you? Would you let the great grandkids ride with you? Do you think you're that good of a driver? And for some people, I think that breaks through and it gets them to be thinking. But I think the other piece of it, Maureen, is to make sure that that person knows that if you are asking them to maybe pull back on their driving or quit driving completely, what is their alternative? Are they going to be having Ubers? Are you going to drive them everywhere, or someone in the family? Or are they going to get some transportation help from the Area Agency on Aging? So, but that said, Maureen, you cannot force him. You cannot force him. Now, that said, you can always call the DMV, the MVA, let them know your concerns. You can do it anonymously. You can talk to the doctor about it. But there are a lot of people on the road that are not safe drivers that they aren't going to give up driving until there's a crisis. So do the best that you can. All right, we got a couple of more comments. Leslie's giving a little, okay, great. So awesome. Oh, this is great. The team at the Loudoun County Area Agency on Aging do a great job responding to the specific questions about the agency. That's awesome. All right, everybody. I want to just say thank you again one more time. Dawn, if you would put that evaluation into the chat section, we would be so grateful. If you would just take, it will be less than 60 seconds. Just give us a little bit of feedback, what your thoughts are, if you want to be notified about future programs. But thank you all so very much. I wish you a very happy, healthy, safe rest of the day and weekend. And we certainly hope that this has helped you to have more productive conversations with your loved ones who you take such good care of. Have a great rest of the day. And thank you again to the Loudoun County Area Agency on Aging for sponsoring this program for the community. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Jen, and a special thank you to Loudoun County Area Agency on Aging for sponsoring today's program. For information on their upcoming programs, you can visit www.loudoun.gov/AAA. I'm posting the link into the chat so that you can copy and paste it into your browser. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.